Fear is a powerful force that often shapes how we think, feel, and respond to life. It's that subtle voice that whispers worst-case scenarios, makes us second-guess our decisions, and keeps us paralyzed when we're on the edge of growth. But before we can truly shift from fear to faith, we have to pause and recognize where fear comes from. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it hides behind stress, perfectionism, procrastination, or even overthinking. Fear doesn't always scream. It often shows up quietly, disguised as caution or logic, when in truth, it's a defense mechanism trying to protect us from pain, rejection, or failure. Many of us carry fears that began long ago. Maybe it started with a rejection that left a deep wound, or a failure that convinced us we're not good enough. Maybe it was growing up in an environment where uncertainty was a constant companion. So now we crave control in unhealthy ways. The truth is, fear often finds its roots in past experiences that shaped how we see the world and ourselves. It becomes the lens through which we interpret the future, assuming that what hurt us before will hurt us again. But that's not truth. That's trauma speaking. And faith asks us to trade that lens in for a new one that believes something better is not only possible, but promised. Fear thrives in the unknown, and we live in a world where uncertainty is a daily reality. But the problem isn't the unknown. The problem is how we relate to it. When fear runs our minds, uncertainty feels like danger. But when faith leads, uncertainty becomes an invitation. It's not something to be afraid of. It's a space where growth happens. Faith doesn't deny that the unknown exists. It simply chooses to believe that what we can't yet see is being worked out for our good. To make that shift, we must start by being brutally honest with ourselves. Where is fear still making the decisions? Where is it holding us back from walking in confidence, in purpose, in peace? Until we recognize fear's influence, we can't redirect it. Awareness is the first step to change. Once we bring fear into the light, we can choose something different. We can begin to replace it with faith, not just as a nice idea, but as a practice. A mindset, a daily discipline. Fear feeds on control, the desire to have all the answers before taking a step. But faith says, move anyway. It says, even if you don't know how it will work out, trust that it will. And that trust doesn't come from ignoring reality. It comes from trusting a higher reality, that God is working, that you are not alone, and that what you're walking into is not random. Every time you choose faith over fear, even in the smallest moment, you are training your spirit to believe more deeply. You are breaking old patterns that no longer serve you and stepping into a mindset that aligns with growth, hope, and peace. This shift is an instant. It's not a one-time decision, but a continual process. There will be moments when fear creeps back in, and that's okay. What matters is that you notice it, name it, and then choose faith anyway. This is how transformation begins, not by eliminating fear completely, but by refusing to let it lead your life. So before we move any further, ask yourself, what fear has been holding the wheel? And are you ready to hand it over to faith? Faith is often misunderstood. Some think it's simply blind optimism, a kind of wishful thinking that ignores reality. But real faith is much deeper, much stronger. It's not about pretending everything is perfect. It's about believing that even in the imperfection, even in the unknown, there is purpose. To shift from fear to faith, we must understand what faith truly is. It's not just a feeling. It's a decision, a posture of the heart, a choice to trust, especially when things don't make sense. Faith begins with trust. Trust in something greater than yourself. For many, that trust is rooted in God, a divine presence that knows more than we do, sees farther than we can see, and works in ways we often don't understand. For others, it may begin as a quiet confidence in the process of life, a belief that there is meaning behind the chaos. Either way, faith invites us to release the tight we have on certainty and open our hands to possibility. It's easy to have faith when everything is going well. But real faith is proven when things aren't. When prayers seem unanswered. When doors close. When life doesn't look like we thought it would. This is where faith becomes more than a concept. This is where it becomes a lifeline. And what's beautiful about this kind of faith is that it doesn't require all the answers. It just requires a yes, a willingness to believe that even when we can't see the full picture, there's something good being painted behind the scenes. Fear wants evidence before it moves. Faith moves before the evidence appears. That's what makes it powerful. Faith says, I will keep going even though I don't have every detail figured out. It gives us the courage to take the next step without knowing exactly where it will lead. It teaches us to walk by trust, not by sight. And in doing so, it builds strength within us. Strength we didn't know we had. One of the most beautiful things about faith is that it grows. You don't have to have perfect faith to begin. You just have to be willing. A mustard seed of faith can move mountains. Not because the seed is strong, but because of what it's connected to. That connection to God, to purpose, to hope, is what sustains us. It's what lifts us above fear and gives us a new lens to see our circumstances through. Faith tells us we are not at the mercy of fear. We are not powerless. We are grounded in something bigger. Faith also redefines how we measure success. The world may tell us success is about outcomes, what we achieve, what we accumulate. But faith says success is about obedience. Are we walking in alignment with what we believe, even when it's hard? Are we trusting even when we don't yet see the reward? Faith reshapes our values, our responses, and our sense of identity. It reminds us that we are not just reacting to life. We are co-creating with something higher. That changes everything. When we truly understand faith, we stop trying to control every detail and start leaning into peace. That doesn't mean we stop planning or being wise. It means we no longer let anxiety run the show. We shift from striving to trusting, from panic to presence. And over time, this becomes not just a way of thinking, but a way of living. So if fear has been the dominant voice in your life, remember this: you don't need to have it all figured out to take the first step. Faith isn't the absence of questions. It's the courage to believe, even with the questions still present. What we feed grows. It's a simple truth, but it carries deep power when we apply it to our inner life. If we constantly dwell on what could go wrong, replay our worst fears, or surround ourselves with negativity, fear will grow stronger. It will start to shape the way we think, speak, and act. But the opposite is also true. When we choose to feed our faith through our habits, thoughts, and the people we engage with, it begins to rise up within us, even in the presence of fear. That's why one of the most practical and powerful ways to shift from fear to faith is this: feed faith, starve fear. Fear doesn't just show up out of nowhere. It often enters through the small, unnoticed moments. What we read, what we watch, what we meditate on. It grows quietly in the background of our lives, but so does faith. The difference is, faith has to be intentionally nurtured. It doesn't shout for attention the way fear does. You have to create space for it. That means making daily choices that water the seeds of trust, hope, and courage. Start by paying attention to your inputs. What are you consuming on a regular basis? Are you filling your mind with stories of fear, failure, and scarcity? Or are you leaning into messages of encouragement, truth, and possibility? This could be as simple as beginning your day with a quiet moment of reflection, reading a passage that reminds you of your identity and purpose, or surrounding yourself with voices that build you up rather than tear you down. Your environment matters. The voices you allow in your space matter. It also means speaking to yourself differently. Our words have power. If all we say is, I can't, I'm afraid, or what if this fails? We are reinforcing fear's hold on us, but we begin to speak life over our situations. Even when we don't feel strong, even when the outcome is unclear, we begin to shift the atmosphere inside of us. Try saying things like, I trust the process. I am not alone. Or even now, something good is unfolding. These aren't just feel-good phrases. They are reminders that call your spirit higher. Feeding faith also means being mindful of the stories we tell ourselves. Often, fear is based on stories we've repeated over and over in our minds. Stories about why we're not enough, why it won't work, or why we should play it safe. But those stories aren't always true. Faith invites us to write new narratives, stories of resilience, redemption, and growth. It gives us the power to choose a different perspective. And over time, as we replace fear-based thoughts with faith-based ones, our mindset begins to change. We start to expect goodness instead of disaster. We begin to believe in possibilities rather than problems. And finally, feed your faith by surrounding yourself with people who reflect it. Community is a powerful force. When we walk with people who are also choosing faith, who encourage us to keep going, and who remind us of the bigger picture, our faith multiplies. We weren't meant to do this alone. Fear isolates, faith connects. And in connection, we find the strength to keep moving forward, even when it's hard. So if fear feels loud in your life right now, it may not be because you're weak. It may just because you've been feeding it. The good news is you have the power to change your focus. Start feeding your faith today, even in small ways. Because the more you do, the more fear will lose its grip. Life will always present us with challenges. That's not something we can avoid, no matter how much we plan or pray. But what we can change is how we interpret those challenges. For many of us, fear immediately rises when trouble shows up. We assume the worst, brace for impact, or question whether we're strong enough to handle it. But here's the truth: every challenge is also an opportunity. It's a chance to build faith. It's a moment to shift our perspective from, why is this happening to me? To what is this trying to grow in me? A fear wants us to view challenges as roadblocks. It tells us that pain means punishment, that struggle means failure, and that if we were doing everything right, life wouldn't be this hard. But that's simply not true. Some of the most faithful people have walked through seasons of hardship. Not because they lacked faith, but because faith was being developed in them. Just like a muscle is strengthened by resistance, our faith grows strongest when it's tested. That shift in mindset is powerful. When we reframe a challenge as something that can build us rather than break us, fear loses its control. Faith doesn't eliminate difficulty. It transforms how we walk through it. It whispers, there's more to this moment than you can see. And that doesn't always make the pain disappear, but it does give it meaning. When we face something hard, faith invites us to lean in and ask, what is this moment asking of me? What is this revealing about what I truly believe? Because it's in those raw, honest spaces that faith begins to deepen. We stop relying on surface level strength and start tapping into something more solid, more rooted. Often, challenges expose the areas where our faith is still fragile. They bring to light the places we still hold fear or cling to control. But that exposure is not shameful. It's an invitation. It's a chance to do the real work of trusting, even when we feel unsure. Instead of resisting the discomfort, faith teaches us to sit with it, to ask better questions, and to allow it to refine us. That's where growth happens. In the stretch, in the unknown, in the wrestling. Think about the moments in your life that shaped you the most. Chances are, they weren't the easy ones. They were probably the ones that hurt, the ones that didn't go as planned, the ones that left you wondering if you'd make it through. And yet, here you are, stronger, wiser. That's what faith does. It turns pain into purpose and turns trials into testimonies. It teaches us that we are not defined by what we go through, but by how we go through it. This shift from fear to faith becomes easier when we remember that challenges are not punishments. They are often preparations. They are preparing us for something greater, something we can't yet see. They're building endurance, compassion, and clarity. And while it's not always easy to embrace that in the moment, it's what allows us to keep going with our heads high and our hearts open. So, the next time life hands you something difficult, pause and take a breath. Instead of asking, how do I escape this? Ask, how can this grow me? Because with that one shift, you begin to move from fear to faith, from avoidance to alignment. And that's where real transformation begins. One of the greatest illusions fear creates is the need to control everything. It convinces us that if we can just plan enough, prepare enough, or predict every outcome, we can avoid pain or disappointment. It becomes a constant striving, a pressure to hold everything together on our own. But the truth is, control is a heavy burden, one we were never meant to carry, and the more we cling to it, the more anxious, exhausted, and overwhelmed we become. That's why one of the most powerful ways to shift from fear to faith is to practice surrender. Surrender doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean becoming passive or irresponsible. In fact, true surrender takes incredible strength. It means releasing our obsession with the outcome and trusting that we are being guided by something bigger than our limited understanding. It means saying, I don't have all the answers, but I believe I am held, I am led, and I am not alone. That's faith in action. Not because we feel certain, but because we've chosen to trust. So much of our fear is rooted in the unknown. What if things don't go the way we hoped? What if we lose something or someone important? What if we fail? These are all questions fear uses to trap us in a cycle of control. But faith doesn't require a guarantee. It asks for surrender. It invites us to rest in the truth that we're not the author of the story, but we can trust the author. And when we let go of the need to dictate every line, we find freedom. We discover peace in the presence of uncertainty. Surrender also shifts our perspective on timing. Fear wants everything now. It's impatient, reactive, and often driven by panic. But surrender teaches us to trust the process, even when it feels slow or unclear. It reminds us that delay is not denial, and that sometimes the very thing we're pushing for is being withheld for our protection or preparation. Faith waits with expectation, not with anxiety. It understands that what is meant for us will never miss us, and what isn't meant for us cannot be forced to stay. This kind of trust doesn't happen overnight. It takes practice. It takes daily choices to let go of control in small ways. Choosing not to obsess over every detail, choosing to pray instead of panic, choosing to breathe instead of brace. And little by little, as we surrender those tight spaces of fear, we begin to experience a different kind of strength. Not the strength that comes from holding it all together, but the strength that comes from knowing we don't have to. When we live from a posture of surrender, we become more open. We can hear more clearly, see more deeply, and respond more wisely. We stop reacting out of fear and start responding out of faith and expect. We stop trying to manipulate outcomes and start aligning ourselves with peace. It's in surrender that we make room for grace, for unexpected provision, for unplanned joy, for healing we didn't know we needed. Surrender is not a one-time event. It's a way of life. It's the quiet courage to say, even here, even now, I trust you. It's what transforms fear into faith, chaos into clarity, and striving into peace. And when we begin to live from that place, we stop clinging to control and start living with open hands and an open heart. Fear often speaks loudest through our emotions. It rises quickly, triggered by doubt, rejection, uncertainty, or perceived threats, and it urges us to react. Fast, defensive, self-protective. And while emotions are valid and worth acknowledging, they should never be the compass that steers our decisions. When we allow fear-driven emotions to guide us, we end up making choices that are small, reactive, and often misaligned with our values or purpose. But faith calls us higher. It invites us to speak and act not from emotional impulse, but from grounded conviction, a place of deep trust and clarity. Shifting from fear to faith doesn't mean ignoring how we feel. It means learning to lead ourselves through it. Faith says, I see the fear, but I won't let it choose for me. It gives us space to feel the emotion without letting it become the driver of our story. It teaches us to pause, to breathe, and to ask better questions before we act T. Is this fear or faith speaking right now? Am I reacting from panic or responding with purpose? This shift becomes especially important in difficult moments. When we're faced with decisions, disappointments, or uncertainty, it's tempting to lash out, to retreat, to give up, or to say things we don't really mean. But those are fear responses. Faith, on the other hand, encourages a different posture. It says, slow down. Anchor yourself. Choose from belief, not emotion. This isn't always easy. It requires inner strength and a clear connection to what we truly believe in. That's why cultivating faith isn't a mindset, it's a lifestyle. It's daily work. Prayer, reflection, affirmations, intentional stillness. That builds a steady foundation we can stand on when storms hit. There will always be moments when emotions feel overwhelming. That's human. But faith offers a steady hand in the chaos. It reminds us of who we are and whose we are. It brings us back to truth. not just our truth, but eternal truth. When fear tells us we're not enough, faith reminds us we're already equipped. When fear says the worst will happen, faith whispers that even if it does, we won't be alone. That's the voice we want to act from. The one rooted